Hey, what's up? This is Kristen Carter, and you've tuned into the I Have ADHD podcast. I am medicated, caffeinated, regulated, and ready to roll. Oh my goodness, today is going to be the best. I have with me Dr. Jessica McCarthy. She is a licensed clinical psychologist and a neuropsychologist specializing in neuropsychological and psychoeducational assessments and cognitive behavioral therapy for children through adults. Jessica focuses on neurodivergent populations, including ADHD, autism, and learning differences. And she conducts medically driven assessments for conditions like TBI, stroke, and dementia. Listen, this is going to be an incredible episode because we are going to talk through the process of assessment from start to finish. If you are someone who is curious about the assessment process and you're wondering what the heck is involved, this episode is 100% for you. Dr. McCarthy is going to give us behind the scenes insights, and she's going to tell us exactly what the assessment process is like. And if you've already been diagnosed and you're like, I'm not sure if this episode is for me, we are going to have the best time.
I mean, if anything, even if you've already been diagnosed, like you get to hang out with two Jersey girls for the next hour and a half.
This is exactly
get better than that.
I'm saying. Two Jersey girls with ADHD sitting across the table from each other, talking about, yes, ADHD, the assessment process, and what it is just like, even maybe we can throw in living as a mom with ADHD in the world, like being put together, hair curled, makeup on.
That's the Jersey. I can't.
Do you see what I'm saying? Yes,
that's Jersey. But thank you for having me. We're gonna have such a good time today.
I'm so glad you're here, and I'm so glad that I get to share with my listeners this behind the scenes process of the assessment, because I've done a couple episodes here and there about what the assessment process is like, but I've never had a clinician come in and walk us through it. So my first question for you is, what do you feel like makes the biggest difference between a crappy assessment experience for an ADHDer and a good experience for an ADHDer?
I think that the first thing is making sure you are working with somebody who knows what they are doing, which sounds crazy, but there's a difference between somebody clicking every single box on their Psychology Today page and throwing in that, like, they work with people with ADHD and attention and executive dysfunction, all of like the hot words on like TikTok and whatnot. And somebody who is up to date with the research, who knows what they are looking for, who understands the patterns of that we see in the data with ADHD and just has experience with the population. I think that's one part of it. And then the other part of it is, the assessment process, like you said, Kristen, can be incredibly daunting and incredibly overwhelming because people think tests, they think like, oh my gosh, it's like a school test. So, when we have people come in office for the evaluations, like I have taken such great care to make the office such a warm, beautiful, and inviting space. So we're not dealing with any additional anxiety or worries or stress on top of what might already feel like an inherently stressful process for people.
Now, how does someone with ADHD who's already overwhelmed, who's already feeling a little bit maybe defeated in their real life, how does someone like that figure out if the clinician has the experience that they want them to have? So how do we know how to like deduce on Psychology Today? Like, are they just clicking a box or do they actually have experience?
They are just clicking a box. So I always tell people to go to a person's website. If they don't have any information there about like their background, their experience, what they've done, then don't go and see them, number one. Number two, even how we've built into our processes for how people can get in touch with us. You can send us a message on Instagram. You can send us a message through our email. You can text. You can call. Like, I know me, for example, I hate talking on the phone. I will do everything in my power to avoid talking to somebody. So if I can send you a message, I'm going to do that. You will get our office manager, Jackie, who is incredible, and she is patient, and she will walk you through. You will get an email from our system. You will get an email from Jackie explaining everything. You will get text. We give you all of the reminders in place that make it not only easy to access us, but difficult to forget your appointments and what you need for each appointment.
So what I hear you saying is that there are clinicians out there who make the process ADHD friendly.
Yes. And if they don't, then don't go to them, because this whole process is inherently stressful, and you're paying money for it, because a lot of people don't take insurance because it's a whole other episode. But yet you need to be, it's not just about cultivating the experience, but it is in this instance. Like you want to know that you are seen, heard, understood, so we can do our job of getting the cleanest data possible. Because if I'm not, then what am I measuring here? Am I actually measuring someone's, pre-existing anxiety and stress, or am I measuring these confounding variables of all the stressors because someone couldn't get a parking spot, someone didn't remember to bring a snack? Like I keep a ton of snacks and protein shakes in the office. People didn't bring a sweatshirt. We just make it easy to get the questions answered. They're emailed to you so you can check your email if you forget. Like just so many stop gaps in place that it's difficult, like I said, for patients to forget an appointment or to feel overwhelmed by the experience.
I like what you said about like getting the cleanest data, because you're absolutely right. Even just getting out of the house, and we talked about that, like getting out of the house this morning, and like we both have kids, and we both had a commute to get here. Like that in itself is enough to get you agitated, overwhelmed, and feeling really chaotic. And then if you're a clinician who's doing an assessment and the person is already in this agitated, chaotic state, it's hard to gather whether or not you're getting like the
cleanest data possible. And we can see that. It's like people are coming in hot, like I like to say, then we take the time to cool them down.
Yeah.
Because what's the point otherwise? We tell people from the start, the children and adults alike that we assess, like this is not necessarily a one and done appointment. They're broken down into multiple appointments, and we will break them down into as many appointments as possible to get the good data. Especially when we work with the younger kids, so like parents of kids that might have ADHD, this might be for you. We will block off maybe an hour and a half to 2 hours. But if all a child can tolerate, or even an adult for that matter, is 45 minutes, guess what? We're done. Yeah. We'll see you next appointment, because, and we take breaks in between, and we're not trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, because then I can't make, what conclusions am I making? We just wasted time and wasted money, two things that I in particular am not interested in wasting that. I don't have time to give, and if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it right the first time.
Okay, so what would you say are the most important steps when someone is looking for someone to assess them? So an ADHDer out there, undiagnosed, can you give us like one or two things? Like, hey, here's what to look for. Like, here's what to put in your Google search. Or like, how do we do that?
I'm trying to think of like the keywords for our Google search. So like ADHD assessment near me, ADHD expert. And when you get to their website, they should have a section, as I'm in the middle of redoing mine, on ADHD. Yeah. They should be able to explain it to you. You shouldn't leave that website feeling like I'm more confused than when I started. I don't know what to do, and I don't know what my next steps are. And if you call the office, and if that's a stressful experience, then I wouldn't go there, because if they're not putting policies and procedures in place to get it right from the first phone call, then what is it going to be like throughout? Like, let's just make this easy. I love this.
I just want to encourage anyone who's like, I don't know if I have the executive function to like continue to call offices. Like, it is worth it. It's worth it to find a clinician who is going to really have compassion and understanding. And if they're making it difficult, they don't actually have compassion and understanding.
They don't. And especially for adults, by the time people reach out to us, they are already at a level 10, because they probably just spent, I don't know, the last few decades struggling.
Yes.
And the last thing they need is getting someone on the phone that's cranky, or there's not clarity on the website with like what I'm doing and what my next steps are. And when the adults call, it's everything is time sensitive. But like I said, it's usually because something has hardcore crash and burned.
So it's like an acute problem.
It's acute and chronic to the extent that when we meet with the patient, the problem, when we're doing the clinical interview, the problem has been existing for quite some time, but they either ignored it or they were able to compensate or they thought it was something else. Yeah. But by the time we get the phone call, somebody just, failed their semester in college. Yeah. Somebody didn't pass the bar exam because they didn't have the accommodations that they had in place. And again, we always joke, like the ADHDers, there's a November in New Jersey, the bar exam deadline to submit accommodations for I think it's the February exam is November 30th.
Yeah.
Without fail, November 1st hits, we get like 3 or 4 phone calls of people being like, I need an evaluation now because it can be overwhelming to do. And, we try to get as many people in and just make it as quick as possible.
Yeah, it's so great. Okay, so what are the first steps? Somebody calls your office, they come in for an assessment. What are the steps involved in the process?
So the first step is, like I said, you'll speak to our office manager, Jackie, and I cannot sing her praises enough. She's like my partial frontal lobe. She will go over everything, what this entails, what this does not entail, what the cost is, and how we break it down. And we break it kind of into 3 different chunks. The first chunk is the intake, and that's when we meet with patient and sometimes the patients and their families for an hour and a half. We do a very in-depth clinical interview. Now, depending on the person sitting in this chair, some people will say, like, you can do a really, really good clinical interview and be able to diagnose ADHD without doing any other testing. And a lot of times psychiatrists will do that because ADHD is a neurodevelopmental disorder. So if somebody as an adult is saying like, oh my gosh, like I can't pay attention, I can't remember this, but they don't have the history going back to childhood to back that up, then it's not necessarily ADHD. There might be some executive dysfunction, but not to the level where we would make a diagnosis, or there could be something else going on, like anxiety or depression. So that first intake process really gets us to understand what's going on. Us as the psychologists, we have some working diagnoses. We have some things that we also want to assess and look at if there's any learning issues. Like we catch dyslexia in adults, believe it or not. Like if someone's struggling with taking a standardized test and they have ADHD and anxiety, well, guess what? You also have maybe mild dyslexia that impacts your ability to read a longer passage and make sense of it under a time demand. Yes. And we also can assess for any comorbidities, so co-occurring conditions, anxiety, depression, substance, if there's some personality issues, trauma, things like that. Then the next, however many, usually it's 2 to 3, sometimes more of those sessions of the actual testing that's in person, paper and pencil testing. There's some manipulatives, there's some computerized tasks. That's the bread and butter of it. And then usually about 2 to 3 weeks later, we do the feedback where we go over our findings, we go over our recommendations. And for us, it's a very collaborative process because we've looked at their medical records if we've needed to. We've looked at academic records. We've had patients fill out self-report forms. We've had teachers fill out self-report forms if it's, a child, or even we've had college parents be like, can you talk to my professor about this? Whatever.
Yeah.
We look at everything together, and we also make the question of asking, like, what do you need? Now, we're not in the business of giving out diagnoses or recommendations, but I want to be very clear, like what the question is, not just like diagnostically, but like, what do you need? This report I'm giving you has legs. Where do you need this to run to? How can this report and any recommendations or accommodations improve your quality of life? Because if it's not doing that, then I didn't do my job. My team didn't do our job. So feedback is collaborative to make sure what we are putting in place, the patients understand and the families understand, especially if it's for a medication consult, if it's a therapy consult, if we're making school-based recommendations or college-based recommendations, because those are 2 different processes for children who are K through 12 and for adults in college, and how to even start that process to get accommodations. Or if you need to submit it to, the college board or, the state licensing, if it's just for how to make things work in the workplace, if it's ADA accommodations in the workplace, like we take the time. Yeah. And then we finalize the report and then the magic's done. Well, at least the assessment process is done. And then we get on to
magic is done, yes.
Well, a lot of times, our patients stay with us because we do provide executive function services as well. Or if they need therapy, we tend to keep a lot of our patients in-house. So they're with us for a while.
Okay, so I have a couple of questions about all of that. So my first question is, Do you feel that every clinical assessment should involve both an interview and some sort of like written paper test, or what you were describing with like manipulatives and different types of things?
Yes, 1,000%.
Can you explain that a little bit?
Yes. So there's a difference between getting a diagnosis and understanding your diagnosis. So I can put 10 people in this studio and they're all going to have an ADHD diagnosis. But where their executive dysfunction or their emotion dysregulation occurs is going to look different. Someone might have a hard time with task initiation. Someone might have a hard time like with working memory or processing speed. Somebody might have a hard time with organization, staying on task. Someone's emotion dysregulation might be just incredibly severe because of all these things. Some people may have a hard time with, transitioning. Yeah. I have a hard time with transitioning, and I'm 42 and I do this for a living. So a diagnosis doesn't tell me that, but an assessment does. So a lot of times people...
Wait.
I know, absorb. I could just go, blah, blah, you have to stop.
Wow. Okay. A diagnosis does not tell you the specific areas in which the ADHDer struggles.
Correct.
But the assessment will tell you the specific areas in which this particular ADHDer struggles. Fascinating.
And people call, and I tell people, pills don't build skills. If it's an adult, they're like, I need meds. Great. Why? Why do you need meds? So we turn the temperature down on your brain. Then what? Do you know how to manage your time? Do you know how to manage your schedule?
Yeah.
How do you struggle? Like, okay. But a diagnosis won't do that. Even like as a great psychiatrist, other members that we work with on our team that actually will do a little bit more of an in-depth interview, they're not trained to do what a psychologist or a neuropsychologist can do as far as administering the tests that can help us answer those questions. And usually for adults, the batteries are less detailed than what they are for kids. We don't necessarily have to do all of the academic testing because for the most part, we're not making academic accommodations unless we think that there's dyslexia or something that is directly impacting college, or law school, med school, something like that. The testing does seem to be, or tends to be a little bit more pared down, a little bit quicker to get through. And it helps us to say, hey, you have ADHD and here's what it looks like for you. And then it's kind of like we're giving the next clinician, whether it's us or they're going, here's the roadmap.
Yeah.
Like I don't understand. And we get it sometimes. Like, and look, when we do executive function, we call it executive function skills training. For us, it's a combination of the coaching and this emotion regulation piece. We can kind of sort of figure it out if people haven't or don't want to do a full-blown battery because there is cost involved in that. And some people can come in and say, here are the problems I'm having, and we can do that.
Yeah.
However, especially for people who might have comorbid major depression, anxiety, trauma, and they didn't talk about that with their psychiatrist or their primary care because they just came in and said, I have ADHD. We take the time to ask that. Yeah. So I can give someone recommendations for ADHD, but go see my girl. I refer to people that I know. Go see my girlfriend who does really, really good trauma work because this is like pouring gasoline on the ADHD fire that's already occurring. Yeah. Sometimes you can't understand that or see really how somebody might decompose during a task like they would during an interview.
Wow.
And that the more time we get to spend with people doing different things, I don't care how people do it. I don't care about the outcome. I care about how people do it. I care about the process. And that is the magic of the assessment process. We get to see it, we get to touch it, we get to feel it, and then we get to fix it.
Wow.
It's awesome.
So for someone who maybe lives in Florida and is not going to be coming to New Jersey for an assessment by you, what can they...
Or they can catch a flight. Like catch flight's not feelings. Like, come on. Come see us in Jersey. It's beautiful. Especially this time of year as we get into winter.
Yeah. America, we just need to set the record straight that New Jersey is actually the most beautiful state.
1,000. I mean, Newark and flying
People don't understand how gorgeous it is. But like Newark doesn't really, that's a blip. It's a blip on the radar.
It doesn't. But everything else is beautiful. Please come see us.
Okay. So how can an ADHDer, what language should they use with the person that's going to be diagnosing, assessing? What language can they use to get what you give? Do you know what I'm saying? So like, how can an ADHDer ask for the right things from their clinician?
When they are working with somebody who knows what they are doing, they don't have to. It is our job as psychologists to ask the questions and to listen. People think that like psychologists, like I'm in the business of giving advice. I tell people all the time, I don't want to give advice because then two reasons. Number one, then I'm responsible if it's the wrong advice.
Sure.
Number two, my job is to teach you how to solve your problems. I don't want you to be my patient forever. And if you do, wonderful. I love that. But my job is to teach you how to figure shit out, whatever that may be.
Yeah.
So I've gone into my own therapy, addressing my own stuff, being like, I literally have no idea where the fuck to start.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it is not my job or responsibility to problem solve. It is the doctor, the therapist's job. It is to start and know what questions to ask. Because if someone's like, oh, you have a hard time paying attention, if they don't go beyond that, I would be like, I need my money back and walk out immediately. So you can literally come as you are, come with the tears, come with like that. I mean, that's how I show up usually to my therapy sessions and like whatnot. But like, that's what I'm saying. It's, you don't, when you come to see us, especially at our practice, like you can surrender. You really can, because, or anyone that knows what they are doing, especially in this world of ADHD, you don't have to, like, you can take the Barber the Builder tool belt off. You don't have to fix anything. Yes. That is literally our job, to help give you the tools that you can then go heal thyself out in the real world. You don't have to.
So it really all comes back to make sure you find someone who knows what they're doing.
Correct.
That's the fundamental concept here, is making sure that when you do your Google search, that all of the pieces are lining up. Yes. So they say they're an ADHD specialist, but then also their website indicates that as well. Yes. And then also when you give them a call, they're really compassionate. They're kind. They give you reminders. They don't expect anything from you.
And check out their Instagram page. Like, I'm 42. Like, I did not grow up in the world of social media. Social media is a bit of a thorn in my side. Guess what? Like, I have college and high school interns that help with that. I have an amazing publicist who I'm like, literally tell me how to do this. Yeah. We take so much time I did a series in the summer about like what to expect out of a neuropsych evaluation. So people can go watch that and listen to that. What's the difference between an evaluation for school and evaluation for something else? Yeah. We just had ADHD Awareness Month. I didn't do as much posting because I had the flu and pneumonia at the same time. Yeah. But, you know, we post stuff from, you know, constantly. We make content. You should be able to find their online presence. And by the way, you can also do a consult. Like, we offer, if people want, like, they can do like a 10-minute, 15-minute consult with us, just to, if they want to vet us or make sure we know what they want to, you know, make sure that we're the right fit for them. We offer that as well.
Yeah. Okay. So when someone goes in for a ADHD consult with somebody that knows what they're doing, they should expect to have an interview. And they should expect to have some sort of assessment where they are working with paper and pen in front of them.
Correct. Paper, pencil, some manipulatives, computer, and they will have self-report forms to fill out, which is
in advance, probably.
Yes, and that's what we usually get people in for an intake within a week or so. We always try to, because that's an hour, and we can do that virtually. That's easy.
Yeah.
Why? Because when people call, they don't want to wait.
Yeah, we all know that, but why do we have to wait in so many practices?
Well, it depends, because if it's an insurance-based practice, they tend to be booking out because it's insurance-based, and I can appreciate, you know, that there is a substantial financial investment in this. Even for our practice, like I'm thinking right now, like, what month is this? This is November. We're probably like getting people in at about like physical testing within 3 weeks. We get that intake done immediately. Amazing. Just so people can feel like, okay, the process is starting, because they will also have self-report forms if they have parents or a spouse, just to get, you know, perspective on how this person's functioning. As a lot of the tools that we use are designed to do just that, get my information as a patient and get collateral information. And sometimes that takes time. And especially with the school-based evaluations, sometimes the teachers get back right away. Sometimes we have to hunt them down because they're, I don't know, managing a classroom of 20 some odd kids, and they might be feeling. So that process takes time. So we get people in for an intake right away, so they feel like we care, we're starting the process. We get them in as soon as we can for testing, usually within 2 or 3 weeks. and they're filling out the forms in the process. But like I said, we don't take insurance, so I can get people in a little bit quicker. And I don't. The marketing and advertising piece for our practice is always tricky because like you want to have patients, right? But like I don't like a 2-month wait list because like I just called a dermatologist for my daughter this morning and they're like, March. I was like, nice try. That's not happening. I have a problem right now. Do better. So I mean, we're getting in on Friday. That was my train ride down here, was handling that. So we're getting in on Friday. But like that's just how I
think anyone with ADHD who is like an adult who is finally reaching out for help.
Yeah.
They're struggling, like the shit has hit the fan.
Yeah. Repeatedly, probably.
Yeah.
Unless there has been a massive shitstorm.
Right.
Like,
exactly.
It's hit.
So it's like when they're told, we can see you in the summer, there's like, I need help now.
No, absolutely. Although sometimes we have parents and like the kids, they're doing well enough, but like we need to address this coming.
That's
when there's
different
intention behind that. That is completely different from this. Yeah. And we understand that and we get them. And we also know how hard, and I know this, I've been in and out of therapy since I was a teenager, how hard it is to make that first call, text, email, reach out to be like, hey, I'm struggling. I'm having a really hard time with this. That's more than half the battle right there. And we recognize that by the time someone has reached out, that they have had to, put their brave pants on and like make that call, and that they were probably shaking and nervous, and probably for every time right before they clicked send or they called us, they probably hung up or closed out the email or sent it in their drafts a few times before they actually did reach out. And we recognize that. And I say too, like, I'm not in the business of good news. Like, I'm not Santa Claus. Like, I'm not necessarily bringing cheer. When people call me, there's a problem. And it's our job to fix it, period. And give them the information that we can work together on them fixing it.
Yep. For the record, you have ADHD.
I do. It was very late diagnosed because of masking and the wonder that is anxiety that I tend to present with on a regular basis. But yeah, it was a therapist, as you and I were talking before the show, like I was that girl, that bitch in school who had like the high IQ and the straight A's and the really good grades. I slipped a little bit in like calculus and the sciences, and my guidance counselor was telling you, told me like, oh, you're just not good in those areas. Well, no, guess what? Those just had multi-step problems. There were intricacies in there that just my brain struggled with. And like, I wanted to be like the next Al Roker on the Today Show. I wanted to take his job when he retired, or chase tornadoes, but that didn't happen because I struggled in STEM. And maybe that was, like life-saving, because I probably would have gotten like killed chasing the dopamine rush. That would be a tornado, right? So I ended up as a psychologist, but I got to college. I did my undergraduate at Lehigh here in Pennsylvania. And I went from being like student council president, field hockey captain, great grades, to a 1.67 GPA after my first semester, because I had no idea how to study.
Yep.
I had no idea how to organize my time. I had no idea how to start tasks. And the biggest thing that I tell parents, especially when kids are transitioning to college, the bumpers are about to come off, like bumpers from bowling. Like I don't want to say we coddle kids, but wow, the structure that is in place for kids these days does not set them up for success in college. And then they go and they're on their own, and it's like, sweet, here's your schedule, go about. Yeah. And I just stopped going to class because I'm like, well, I always figured it out. But then I got an F in intro to psych. An F in intro to psych.
Oh, I love it.
I apparently have to go and then study for the exams. I just thought I could wing it, and then I didn't. Like, I had friends in the lecture hall, like they applauded when I showed up occasionally. And that was that. In hindsight, should have been a problem.
I just feel like that's so inspiring, though, to the ADHDer who is struggling, who's paralyzed, who is watching daytime TV and scrolling on their phone and feeling like, I'm never going to amount to anything. I failed XYZ. I can't do it. And it's like, no, when you have the right support, you can go from failing intro to psych and having a 1.6 GPA to being an extremely well-educated and successful neuropsychologist.
And there were Thank you. But I still struggle with it. And how I manage my time, especially now being, a parent with 2 kids, and I'm a single parent. I actually got divorced during COVID. So it makes it that much more difficult. And I have to have that many more systems, which sometimes I pay attention to, and sometimes I choose violence and I don't. But it wasn't even
so good.
It wasn't even until I was in my doctorate that somebody even mentioned ADHD to me. The therapist I was seeing at the time, I was in grad school, and it was either my, towards like the middle end of my first or second year, I don't remember. And I was, I was working in the clinic at our school, and I had a really hard time finishing writing the reports, the extended reports, which require a ton of working memory and organizing and how am I putting the information together? And I was behind getting a report done, and my supervisor was like, "You need to get this shit done." Yeah. And I'm like so anxious, and I got it done because now there's a threat of me getting yelled at. The dopamine kicked in. I stayed up to 2:00 and I finished it. But the director of our program was like, "You need to get your butt into therapy." And that was because the anxiety, that was the obvious part. But my therapist at the time, it was the end of one session. We had just done like a mindfulness exercise, and she looked at me and she was like, "Is it possible that you have ADHD?" I'll never forget this. And I was like, "No, oh my gosh, like, hell no, I'm not that kid who's like the troublemaker, like what we think of when we think of ADHD, like the hyperactive kid. Like, that's not me, bitch, get the fuck out of here." Like, and then like I was insulted that she even considered me that. So and then over the years I've thought about it, and I realized how much I mask and what how the hyper focus of ADHD works for me and when it works. And the anxiety and the pressure that I always felt to keep up appearances when I'm like a duck underneath the water, like I'm frantically going. And to the point where just last year I started medication. Took me to last year because I'm like, I'm a behaviorist. Like, I'm going to put systems in place and this is going to be great. And then I was like, all right, Jess, do you think maybe you actually need more? Like what the research that you read and what you talk about with families in terms of what's the gold star treatment, which is medication and therapy. Do you think maybe you want to practice what you preach here and do that? So I did, and it's changed a lot for me in a good way.
Has it?
It has.
What's that been like?
I mean, it's literally like I'm breathing into it. Like it's like someone turns the temperature down on your brain. And I'm like, oh, I can actually go to my computer and start a task as opposed to walking by it and not starting a task. The task initiation and transitioning from tasks to task is so huge. The emotion dysregulation that occurs that I always thought was just the anxiety or just my personality or me being unhinged, which maybe a little bit, but not to dim my sparkle or anything, but some of that was very directly related to patterns that I saw in my own day-to-day of when I tried to get stuff done. Lifestyle choices, trying to do stuff when I was exhausted, forget about it. It was literally I couldn't, not even because I couldn't do it or I had to just push through it. I could not do it. Yep. And the meds help with that. But I will also say the behavioral piece and the lifestyle choices, and we talk about this with our patients, is huge. And I tell everyone that I work with, my therapy sessions, and even when I'm doing an assessment, we put I call it a systems check. What are you eating? What are you drinking? How are you moving your body? Are you sleeping? And how are you talking to yourself? How are you being kind? Because I don't give a crap how much medication is in your system. Yeah. If you're not hitting at least 3 out of 5 of those things consistently, there is no amount of medication that is going to help with that. So I've been much more mindful in prioritizing how I take care of myself so that in conjunction with meds, or if I don't take my meds, because I lift weights for fun. I love lifting heavy weights, but guess what you need to do? You need to eat.
Yes.
Guess what doesn't happen when I take my meds? Yeah. I don't always eat. So I'm mindful about when and how I take my meds. I'm mindful of how I eat so I can stay strong and sustain myself to do all the things that I need to and want to do for fun and for necessity too. That was a lot.
I love it. You
have to stop me at some point.
No way. Keep going. I'm loving it. Everyone with ADHD knows what to do to improve their lives. You go to bed at a reasonable time and you wake up early, make a list, cross the things off the list in order, manage your time well. Yeah, we know what to do, but ADHD is not a disorder of not knowing what to do. It's a disorder of knowing exactly what to do, but not being able to get yourself to do it. That's why ADHD is so frustrating. We're smart and we want to succeed, but we can't get ourselves to do the things that we know we should do in order to make improvements. That's why I created Focused. I'm a life coach with multiple certifications, and since 2019, I've spent thousands of hours coaching adults with ADHD. Time for me to focus on you. Hello. Welcome to your coaching call. I am going to be coaching you today on relationships. I know what it takes to help an adult with ADHD go from hot mess express to grounded and thriving. Focused is my monthly coaching membership where we go deep and we get to the root cause of what holds us back with ADHD. I'll teach you how to understand your ADHD brain, regulate your emotions, and accept yourself, flaws and all. With this foundation, we build the skills to improve life with ADHD. And not only do you get skills and tools in Focused, but you're surrounded by a huge community of adults with ADHD who are also doing the work of self-development right alongside of you. Dr. Ned Hallowell says, healing happens in community, and I have absolutely found this to be true. As a matter of fact, listen to what actual Focus members have to say about being in this program.
What can I say about Focused?
Full community of people who have issues similar to you, and no one judge you.
Focused has really supported me with my difficulties and asking for help. I've been encouraged and cheered on by the community.
I really like that you can do as much or as little as you want. It's not just about the volume of the content, it's about the quality.
Focus has helped me understand ADHD better.
I would recommend this to anyone.
I would thoroughly recommend Focused.
I can confidently say that this is one of the best decisions that I have made for myself.
So if you're an adult with ADHD who wants to figure out how to be motivated from the inside out and make real lasting changes in your life, join hundreds of others from around the world in Focused. Click the link in the episode description to check it out. I know that clinicians need to gather information about an individual's past. So what type of information are we looking for? So when someone goes into an ADHD diagnosis, they need to have maybe some notes jotted down about like things that they remember from their past, or like, how does that work?
They don't. I mean, look, sometimes people do, because if they haven't been doing well and if they've been keeping a meticulous record, which 9 times out of 10 because of the ADHD, they're not.
Yeah.
But that's also why, like I said before, like when we do the intake, like this is a process that takes a couple of weeks. So like we might ask you stuff and they're like, oh, wow, let me go like pull a grade or pull a transcript or let me double check that. And then they can get the information. So again, they don't have to come in prepared. What we ask about, like we dig into the archives, like we're asking about school, we're asking about grades. And we're not just asking about the outcomes, but like, how did you do in school? So you might have had A's, but like, was your locker messy?
Right.
Did you turn those assignments in on time? When were you finishing them? Because I know for me, in middle school, I had straight A's, but I was that kid who would literally be sitting at my locker in between a class or before lunch, finishing the assignment.
Yes.
And it was wrinkled, and my backpack it didn't start off that way. Everything was perfectly neat. My locker looked like a dumpster fire.
Yeah.
Like, I'm concerned about that. I'm concerned about, when you sat down to take a test or navigate something, what happened in that moment? Did you actually start? Did you know how to move through it? When you got homework, when did you do it? How did you do it? Were you able to start on your own? Did you need a parent to help you? And as you moved through school and the assignments got longer, when did you start those assignments? What were you doing the 12 hours before that assignment was due? Like, that's what I
don't want to talk about it.
Yeah, that's what I want to know. Like, yeah. We have kids in the practice, young adults in the practice who are in college, who are AP students with like great grades, but like, there's a lot of work on time management and starting a task and, really connecting to the why and the value around, making healthy choices and not, trying to really rewire those neural pathways of like, we don't have to wait for the dopamine to kick in and the stress, because sometimes like then you get sick. Like those 24 hours or something is due are not always magical, time and way for things to get done. And then you end up being late.
Yeah.
And then I'm trying to avoid problems before they start. But then I ask people, okay, well, what happens when you've turned in something late? How do you respond to that? Do you get anxious? Do you depress? Does the psychological piece at that point and then impact your ability to continue? So to
Yeah.
continue to finish those assignments.
Yeah.
So those are a lot of the things that we ask. And if it's not starting back in like those elementary, middle school years, you know, like what was your room like when you were younger? Like, you know, because my older daughter, like she's on point. Like my younger daughter, like not so much. That doesn't mean she has ADHD, but like people are able to talk about, you know, their differences with how they've just navigated information and how do you manage stress? What happens when you get upset? You know, what happens if you're in the middle of doing something and you have to transition to something else? Are you able just to pick up right away? How do you manage time? Can you get something done in a short amount of time, or do you need a larger chunk? And what happens if you don't, if it's not perfectly structured, can you transition?
Yeah.
Things like that.
All of that is so good. And then do most clinicians want families to chime in, or do they want, spouses, or like I'm thinking about many of the clients that I see, if you were to ask them specific questions about their childhood, they don't have a lot of memories.
Not everyone does. I mean,
some people do.
Yeah. Sometimes they do. Sometimes we can get like just like the general gist of how things were. We do try to get collateral information from other informants, family members, spouses when we can. But sometimes we can't because they might not exist or people don't want them in if they're being like very secretive about going for a diagnosis. So we do the best that we can. And a lot of times people might not remember, but when we start asking like the very specific questions outside of like, how did you do? Or how is this? Or like, tell me about your locker, or things like that. People are like, oh yeah. You know, tell me about like, were you always rushing to class? What was your, like I said, what was your backpack like? They can tell me about that real quickly.
I don't have a lot of memories of my childhood, but I do have flashes of like underneath my bed.
Yeah.
Right? like what that looked like. Or I have this memory like sitting in class and looking around at everyone else diligently working and me being like, what are you even doing? Like, what is everyone doing right now?
Yeah.
So those flashes I think are so important, right?
And that can tell enough of the story and give us enough information to start to put the pieces together. And that's really our job, is to tell your story and to fill in the blanks maybe where you might not recall, but we can combine what you know from your past with what the data from testing are telling us, and then kind of put together, you know, who you are, what your strengths are too. Like, I mean, we haven't talked about strengths. Like when I'm putting together, you know, recommendations or accommodations or how I can help someone figure out how to do this thing, like what's working? Yep. You know, like I don't care just about like what's not working, like what is working. Yeah. If someone had asked me that, they would have realized that what works for me is when I get up at 3:30 in the morning to do work. Now, I know. So for like a lot of ADHDers, they end up staying up late. I am not hardwired that way. You want to know why? Because my mom doesn't stay up late. My mom has never stayed up late. I can remember when I was younger, like waking up in the morning at like 4 o'clock, which seemed like the middle of the night, to go to the bathroom. Like she's already up in the kitchen, like doing stuff. Yep. I didn't pick up on that until like the end of college and the start of grad school, that, hey, just because everyone else might work better at night, guess when you work better? When you are least distracted, when you are rested and there's nothing bothering you. So there are times when I will get up at like 3:30 or 4 o'clock in the morning, and my best work will be done between 4 and 7 o'clock when my kids get up. I wish someone had asked me that.
Yeah.
Nobody did. So I always ask about that. Like, do you know when your good time is? Because that's a strength that I can then work in to say, hey, if you have a longer assignment, or like if you're working on a 20-page paper, or you have a big project to do for work, and if your boss can be, you know, if you have some flex time, maybe get up early. Yeah. What a novel concept. Go to bed. Stop trying. Just stop. Because the amount of time that's going to take you to like read 5 pages in the morning, it's going to take you like a quarter of that time. So just shut the damn book, shut your laptop, go to bed, night, get a good night's sleep, and get up in the morning and be more efficient and be more responsive and less distracted. Like that's...
I love it. Okay, so what are some of the ways that clinicians assess executive functions?
I feel like every question I'm like, clinical interview again,
clinical
we can ask about that. Okay. However, and again, this is where there's a little bit of a divide in the field as far as our self-reports enough? Are they garbage? And also what, again, the paper and pencil testing. We do all of that because there are specific measures that we can give that directly assess the, different components of executive function. The problem, not the problem, but the issue with some of those is that they're very face valid. So the questions are getting at exactly what we want to. Like there's no trickery in the questions. So it's like, like I have a difficult time managing multi-step problems. Oh my God. Like I'm going to, if it's a scale from 1 to 5, like everything's like 5, 5, 5. So sometimes it's like, are they that severe? Or is that just like, I really want to make sure that this person knows that I'm struggling. So sometimes there's questions of validity in there, but that's also why we have parents fill it out, and it's real, or a spouse. And it's really interesting. Like when you see the profile of executive function from like a person who's not that person and also may just have a different perspective versus the person who I am assessing. Sometimes they align, sometimes they don't, but either way, that's really good information because maybe the parent or the partner isn't aware. Like maybe there's masking, or they're not paying attention to certain pieces, or they're just focusing on like, oh, that person's like emotionally dysregulated, so I'm just going to focus on that. But they're not telling the chapters of the story previously of like, that person's dysregulated because their working memory is shit. Yeah. And they can't manage, the stressors that come with, at the end of the day when there's all these tasks to do. And then that person kind of breaks down. The paper and pencil testing, where I think a lot of the executive function magic happens, like, again, there are tests that directly measure what we're looking at. We're looking, processing speed, fluid reasoning, higher concept, abstract thinking, reasoning, visual and verbal tasks. Like we have tasks to do that. But again, for me, it's also the process. So I might be giving, and again, I have to like choose my words here from a test security standpoint, but if I'm giving a task in which someone might have to draw something or copy something, I want to see how they organize it. Because guess what? Organization is an executive function task. So, and that taps the visual domain. Or if they're doing that, but they're talking it out, or, they say, this looks like this item, this looks like this. So now I know that like they're encoding information more verbally perhaps than visually. I can't capture that on an interview. And if they're drawing a complex picture, if they're trying to put it together and their approach is garbage, well, then I know they're having a hard time with visual organization. That's actually going to have me then go back and look at visual perception, because is this an organization issue? Like if they're looking at a complex picture and if they can't figure out a way to like put it together that's nice and neat, they're just kind of piecemealing it. Or is there actually a problem with how they perceive visual information? Like, can they actually see it? And that's above and beyond like an eye doctor thing. It's how is the brain making sense of that information? So like we can go back and actually really pinpoint where the problem is, which is what that test is designed to do, but also the executive function of the task organization, time management, all of our tasks, even if it's a memory task, it's like, or maybe if it's not a memory task, but like any task that we would do that's timed outside of like a basic processing speed task where that's obvious. If there's a time limit, or even if there's not a time limit and it's just we have to take time to note if this person is taking longer than what we call the normal healthy control that the tests are designed on, well, then that might tell me that there's an issue with time management and I have to figure out where and why that issue exists. And look, sometimes it is related to the executive dysfunction that comes with ADHD, but executive dysfunction can also be seen in anxiety, depression, trauma. So it's the tools that we have are pretty straightforward, but we're almost like, I don't want to be like we're artists, because that I have zero artistic ability, and it would be like insulting to an artist for me to be like that. But this is where another word I hate, the synergistic, is that even a fucking word? Effect of like the parts are bigger than the sum of the whole. Yeah. So I need to be able to see that I can be like, well, you had a really hard time like putting that together.
Totally.
Like tell me about what was going on. Actually, I wouldn't say a hard time. I might during an assessment be like, oh, like tell me what was happening here. Like I won't give the feedback of like you did good or did bad. I was just like, your effort is great. But like, oh, like walk me through that. What happened here? And they're like, oh, this was like really overwhelming. And like I didn't even know where to start and beep a bop a boo. Then that gives me insight, not just to their ability, like some of the visual skills, but also, an executive function skill, for example. And we see that in memory tasks. I could go on and on, but like we see that in memory tasks too. Again, test security, but if we're giving you information that I need you to then give back to me. How are you encoding it? How are you remembering it? Because some of those tasks there's a secret to it. Can you figure out how to hold on to that information in a way that is more efficient than not? Because that's not a memory issue per se. That's a learning issue and an encoding issue, which is more related to attention and executive function.
It's fascinating for you to describe what you're looking for during the process, because I think that snapshot in a test setting is so indicative of our life, where it's like, I may have completed the task, but what was the process like? I may have cleaned my room, but what was the process like? You know, like I may have done the thing, but at what cost? What did it cost me? What was the process like? So it's so interesting how you're describing that in a clinical setting, but it's a perfect snapshot for our life. Like, yes, I finished grad school, but like, at what cost? Was I burnt out? Was I pulling all-nighters? Was it the same? Did I have to work the same amount as my peers or twice as hard, you know? And so I love that you're describing that in a clinical setting.
I mean, if anyone feels bad, like I have a chair in my bedroom that has laundry on it because I struggle with putting stuff away and organizing and like the little tasks of clicking and the multi-step cast, forget about it. Like my work calendar is very good because, again, Jackie, I love you, helps with that. But like like I said, I'm divorced. So like custody, and I don't have a straightforward custody schedule. So every other week it changes, but then every season my kids' sports change and CCD and this and whatever bullshit's on the calendar. I don't even know. I get to the point where like I know my calendar is not updated. I rely on my quasi garbage working memory to think about it because the idea still of sitting down and putting that stuff on a calendar sometimes is really difficult unless I am using my strategies that I teach people of mindfulness and pause and put it in. And because what's the cost of not doing this and taking the time to do it? Or if I can't do it right now, I will send myself a reminder. Or if it's something that's like work related and I can forward to, Jackie and please put this on my calendar so I don't screw up. And by the way, I screwed up an appointment even coming here today. And she was fine. I'm going to see her tomorrow. And a lot of
so relatable,
a lot of grace and compassion around this because even though like there are a lot of fancy and quite expensive paperwork on my wall that says I know what I'm doing, I'm also human too, and I am susceptible to the same issues and struggles. And people think I have it together. And like I said, one crappy day from what feels like sometimes everything falling apart. And I would also tell people that you probably have it more together than you think. And if you don't, like maybe that's okay. And we can help bridge that gap and help to figure it out because like, my goodness, nobody has it fully together. We think everyone is doing it better than us. And if they are in one area, awesome. I celebrate. In my group of mom friends, there is one mom who is so on top of our calendars and scheduling mom dates and dinner. We're going out to dinner tonight. And I'm just like, how blessed am I to have you? Because I don't know shit about what's going on or who's got to be where or like, no. So thank you. That's not my strength. Like I'm going to send you like the dupe for this leotard I got on Amazon for today. Like that's my job. I do skincare and I do hair and I do the nighttime pickup because I'm at work. But y'all do everything else. So I think part of it too is like you don't have to be able to do everything well. What are your strengths? How are you and how can you contribute to society in your own life in a good way?
You make such a good point, like bringing in community aspect of all of this is like when you don't have a community, you feel like you're the one that has to be good at everything.
Correct.
When you do have a community, you can celebrate other people's strengths and lean on other people for the areas that you're weak and then allow others to lean on you in the areas that they're weak.
Yes. And I think for ADHDers, it's a very slippery slope because you have to ask for help. And sometimes that's really hard. One of my, again, in my mom friends in town, she yells at me on a regular basis, yells with love, like Jessica, ask for help, please. And I still need to hear that. I need to hear that because the guilt, and I have fucked up. I have screwed up. There have been substantial consequences for me not asking for help. Nothing that I haven't been able to get myself out of, but like, my God, like we can do a whole different podcast on that. But like the consequences of not letting people know that like you're in trouble or you're struggling because people think that your life is a certain way and think that you've got it together. And now you're dealing with the anxiety and the stress and the pressure of living a life that you think is that, while literally it could be falling apart in maybe sometimes even some pretty unsafe and dangerous ways. You know, like it breaks down to that, and letting people know, you know, that they're not alone. And how can we problem solve? How can we find community? Whether it's a support group, whether it's you already have supports and things in place, how can you connect on a social level? Like forget about the ADHD supports. Like what's good in your life right now? Like where are you having fun, for crying out loud? Because
love that.
Let's get some of the good stuff going and the purposeful and the meaningful connections that might alleviate some of the heaviness that can come with just living with a disorder like ADHD.
So good. Okay, you mentioned the divide in the clinical space, and I want to nudge that. I want to poke at that a little bit.
Now I'm trying to remember what I said.
Well, here, I have a great question for you, which is, what pet peeves do you have when it comes to the way that some clinicians choose to assess? Like what things are you like, oh, I wish I could change that? And I don't want to get you in trouble. I want to get you in trouble.
Oh no,
like,
we're good.
You know,
we're good.
What things do you look at?
People need to stay the fuck in their lane. If they don't know what they're doing, refer out.
Woo! Should we just close in prayer and be done there?
I mean,
it's so good.
And that's across the board.
Yeah, I agree.
That is one of my pet peeves is when, and look, like I run a business, like I need to make money. I need to make ends meet. And I'm a single parent too. So like, I feel that pressure even that much more. But like, I'm also not interested in making money if I don't know, or someone on my team doesn't know what the hell we are doing. Now, there is a reasonable, sometimes like, okay, I know enough about this that I can get supervision and consultation because maybe there's nobody else in my area that can do it. Like I'm trained in rehabilitation medicine as well. So sometimes I get really interesting referrals from patients who might have had like an amputation or this or that, but like it's a younger kid. And I personally like working with like late middle school might be the youngest I go, but like I curse in sessions. So like if you're not down with that, I'm not your patient, but I'm really, or I'm not your doctor, but really high school up. But like if there's nobody else to do it, I will take it and I will get consultation because I can do the medical management around this, the medical rehab piece, but I don't work with kids all the time. But I can get that consultation. But if a referral comes in and it's like, oh, this person, they have ADHD and possibly autism. If you have not taken trainings in autism, got supervision in it, refer out. No amount of money is worth, number one, a patient's care, and number two, as your fucking reputation. I didn't go to school to have that be tanked. Yeah. But you would be surprised how many people don't stay in their lane. That is a huge pet peeve of mine, just because, and people think also because you have a doctorate that you know everything about everything. I don't. And I'm very clear about that. Right. Like, I'll never forget. I had someone in my office when I was a baby clinician, recently licensed. Someone asked me about the criteria about borderline personality disorder. And I was like, oh, I don't know them off the top of my head. Like I literally pulled out my DSM in session. We're going over them. And this is a very like high powered executive. And he looked at me and I'm like, oh shit. Like I just gave away the fact that I don't know. And he said, thank you for admitting that you didn't know the answer and not trying to BS me and make something up. So, and that always sticks with me. If you don't know it, then don't do it and refer out. Huge pet peeve of mine, because it discredits what we do. There are enough people out there that think that like what we do is a soft science relative to physicians or psychiatrists, but they need us. Yeah. Because we give the flavor to the diagnosis that they can't.
So this really speaks to, you know, being very mindful in your Google searches and looking at websites, because it is very easy to say, I work with people with ADHD when you've never had training or specific, like you haven't had ADHD experience and you don't really know that much about it. And so figuring out whether or not your clinician has expertise is very important.
Yes. And like I said, if they're not offering you a consultation, if their website's not easy, if there are just certain processes that aren't necessarily built in from that first contact with your practice, like there's the first hint. Or if their Psychology Today profile literally has like everything clicked.
That is so annoying because when I go and I look for clinicians, either for myself or for my kids, and they're like, I specialize in this, like autism, borderline, blah, blah, blah. It's just like,
No, you don't.
How is that possible?
I mean, I have this conversation with a colleague of mine who is a perinatal mental health professional, and her practice is near mine. I have patients in my practice who are pregnant, who have young kids, and they might, and there's, I'm seeing them for something unrelated to that. But like, oh, they also are, incubating babies and birthing babies and doing all of that. But like, if it's a perinatal mental health issue, if it is, please call my colleague Kara. Like, I'm not dealing with that.
Yeah.
OCD is another one. And I worked in an OCD clinic. I won't treat hardcore OCD. I do have some OCD patients in my practice because I know how to do it. But if it's something that's really, really, really severe, I will rule out. I will send out for that.
Yeah.
Same with eating disorders. I have patients in my practice who I treat some of the emotion dysregulation around that. But if there's an acute issue, I'm not the one. You don't want me.
Yeah.
You don't want me because I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Not supposed to, because you're not be an expert in everything.
Not supposed to.
You're not supposed to be.
So red flag when a clinician says that they are an expert in everything, or has a list of like 10 things. I can do this and this and this and this.
Look, and there's also a difference between like being sensitive and having a safe space.
Sure.
Like I'm thinking for patients who are who are LGBTQIA+.
Yeah.
I have patients, who identify with that in my practice.
Yeah.
I am not an expert with that.
Sure.
One of my friends, Matt, who went to high school with, and he is just such a doll. He lives in LA. He works with that population. Guess who I call?
Yeah.
If I have an issue, I call him, or we just don't take those patients on in the first place. Unless it's something, again, related to something else.
Right.
And that's a supporting factor.
Expertise that you have.
That I need to be sensitive to as a well-trained clinician. Or like, now I'm like, I got to double check my profile. It's like, it's a tricky way though to communicate, like, how is this a safe space for this? But I'm not an expert in that. And that is one of the issues with some of those like websites that are like, find a therapist, click, click, click. So I will say that,
makes sense.
There might be some people who are just trying to say like, I'm sensitive and I'm aware of these things, because the cultural competencies in not just therapy, it's in assessment too. Like what are the norms around certain populations? COVID is a huge one. We're looking at issues of ADHD and reading issues, especially like in kids who missed 2 years to some extent of education.
Huge.
So like we need to take that into account. But I'm not an expert in that. And if someone is saying that they're an expert in everything, go elsewhere.
Love.
Run.
My last question for you is, what do you think about imaging to look at ADHD?
We're getting there.
Say more.
I don't.
We knew one of us was going to hit the mic, so it was me.
The imaging piece, and I think you had also like talked about this too, like in terms of what we use. Did you mean that in the context of like, do we use that in terms of how it's informing the assessment practices, or like tools that we might use during treatment? Or
I mean more of it in the assessment process.
Process?
Brain imaging to assess for ADHD.
We don't, and it's interesting you say that, because that's one of those things like, should we be having people do that beforehand? And we're learning a lot about what the brain is and what it isn't, and what each imaging tool can do. I feel like that would be like a whole other podcast. Sure. We don't require it as a part of the assessment process. If there has been someone who like might have had a concussion, or there's other things going on, sometimes we have that. But I don't think that we necessarily need it per se in order to be able to answer the questions that because sometimes it's like, okay, well, that might be another hurdle. You have to go to a neurologist. You've got to get the prescription. You need to get the test. We need to get the results. When at least my standpoint is that the assessment process is sufficient to be able to get to what we need.
Yeah.
But like now you've got me think again, talk about like not being like a full expert on like the neuroimaging behind ADHD. Although my one colleague, Dr. Bajoli, she honestly would be a better person to ask
That'd
that
be
question.
cool.
But now I'm going to get home or I'm going to be on the train on the way back to New Jersey. I'm going to be like, girl, like, let's double check this. Like, are we not, do we need to like require this as a part of, you know, and how is that informing what we're doing?
In science, right?
Is,
to be able to see the brain and to be able to compare and contrast like what a healthy brain or a typical brain.
Normal, healthy control.
Yeah.
I mean, again, and that we're looking at like an fMRI. Like we're looking.
I mean, how hard would we have to make it for an ADHD?
Well, but see, that's
right?
exactly the problem.
Exactly.
It's not an X-ray. You know, X-ray, MRI is going to look at the structure of the brain.
Yeah.
But we need to look at, you know, again, like what an fMRI or even like a PET scan might look at in terms of the, you know, how certain neurotransmitters of the brain and parts of the brain are quote unquote lighting up during certain tasks. I don't, and not everyone's insurance might approve that. Like there are whole other things. That's
do you
a whole
feel like
thing.
We're headed in that direction, or like, do you get a sense that that is something that clinicians are like thinking about and wanting to?
I mean, like I said, I'm literally going to be on the train being like, is this something I need to put into my practice? It's a great question. I think a well-informed clinician and business owner needs to not only be aware of like what is going on in the imaging world. I mean, like I can speak to this, especially with Alzheimer's. Like we can't, certain disorders, like we can't look at the imaging and be like, oh, that's that. Like for Alzheimer's, we can't confirm that until death because we cannot biopsy the brain. And an MRI is going to show us how certain parts of the brain, like the hippocampus and whatnot, are decomposing, but it's not telling us why. It's going to rule out a tumor. It's going to rule out a stroke. But one of the things that we do ask about during the intake process is, again, how long have symptoms been going on? Are they chronic? Are they acute? There have been times that I've told people you need to go for imaging right now because if there's been a sudden onset of symptoms that's impacting functioning, then I want to make sure that there's nothing going on neurologically that would be potentially, informing and explaining why I'm seeing what I'm doing. So it's a fine line between, I think, although, like I said, I'm going to go home and be like looking this up. Like, do I need it?
No,
because I don't. Well, I mean, again, I think a good clinician is always saying like, ooh, okay, well, do I need to be doing that? And like staying on top of things. So if I attempted to answer that question and I was bullshitting you and be like, oh, yes. My DMs are going to blow up with being like, you don't know what the fuck you're talking about. But I'm like, you're right. If you were asking me about that as a patient, like, how do you feel about that? I might be like, you know what? Like, we don't do that because of our methods are in place that we can, we can get to the question. And imaging, it's not necessary. And it could potentially be a barrier to care because there's cost in all this time and that's going to waste time. And I want to get this answer. But you know what? Like, you might be onto something. We're going to talk about that in my next staff meeting with my team to think about if we needed to, how to go about that. So kind of that fascinating question of staying in your lane. Like if I had the perfect answer to that and I could rattle it off, I would have given it to you. But I don't.
I just think it's so fascinating how much science is advancing and how we are learning so much more about ADHD, especially in adults, and the assessment process, the
treatment process, stuff. I know that. Dr. Barkley's come out with his. I saw some videos with his and some of his research on like how we're looking at the use of nicotine and how that can help. I mean, because we know that there's addiction with ADHD and that, right? But can we break down the nicotine molecules to help with treatments? And like right now we can't because when we separate out the molecules, the part that's the addictive part like fucking helps with ADHD. Like give us a break for crying out loud. Like it's hard enough.
This is why, though, so many people with ADHD are addicted to nicotine because it actually does help to improve.
It does. I have patients. I'm like, or my favorite. Sometimes I'll have patients. They'll be like, I think my vape fell out of my pocket and it's like in the couch. I'm like, maybe we can stop doing that. Like, so again, but the work that we do, it's not just, I joke with my patients. I have dark humor. They know that. But instead of being like, there are conversations about maybe we can stop or how do we stop it? Can we think about curtailing some of these habits that might be helping with the ADHD, but sure as shit aren't helping your body?
Totally.
But we also have a lot of conversations about how can we get you working out? When was the last time you ate? And are you eating protein? Are you eating the right things?
Yeah.
Do you drink enough water? Like I would rather focus on some of the stuff that is might be less resistant to moving, and that I might be able to make them being like, you need to put down the cigarette, like you need to stop drinking. Unless it's at the point where like it's an acute problem,
steps,
right?
Like the foundation and the basic needs. Like I feel like for adults with ADHD, we just need to freaking meet our basic needs. Like, have you eaten anything from the earth?
And I need to meet people where they're at. If they aren't ready to give up certain things, again, unless it's like acutely impacting their functioning, then let me meet you where you're at. And
we might get there.
Let's move that. We're going to get there together. We have the tools to do it.
That. Thank you so much for being here. This has been so fun. Tell us where we can find you. Tell the people all of the things, because after they listen, they're going to be like, who is this woman? I need to go find her.
So we, our website is elementspsych.com. The name of our practice is Elements Psychological Services. We're in northern New Jersey, in Montvale, New Jersey, right around the corner from the Wegmans. So we're local, if you know that. And we're actually going to be opening a second location in Morris County, so a little bit more central, hopefully in 2025. Because, like, why not? We love a challenge. You can find us. You can Google us. That'll bring you to our website. We have an Instagram page, which is elements_psych. And then I have my own professional page, which is dr.jessica.mccarthy. And it's all together. You can find us there.
We will link all of that in the show notes. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for fun. Or me. I feel like I represent my practice and everyone. So have us, me, all that on here.